us, and indeed engagement is encouraged. And probably the best mechanism for making observations or asking questions is to use the little Q&A box, which hopefully you can all see on your screen. On mine, it's in the center of the screen, just towards the bottom. I will look out for questions coming in, and I'll put them to Julian and Graham throughout the presentation if an opportune time arises. There should also be time left at the end for anything that we haven't answered. And given that we've only got 30 minutes today, there may be some questions that we just can't get round to, but we will try and follow up with anything that we do not answer during the event. So I don't want to take up any more time on housekeeping. I'm going to pass over to Graham Newman first, who will do a more formal introduction and tell you a bit more about today's agenda. Graham, over to you.
Thanks, John. Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. So just to introduce myself, I'm Graham Newman. I'm a scheme actuary at Spence Partners. I joined the team in March this year, and that's having spent just over 20 years working previously in as a mixture of small, medium, and large consultancies. So to open the conversation today, I just wanted to start off by saying that the pensions landscape has certainly changed a lot compared to when I started out. And as John has already said, you know, many schemes now sort of starting to eyeball an end game strategy of buying out with an insurance company. Buyouts are obviously complicated projects. We've only got 30 minutes today, as we know, so we're just not going to be able to cover everything that's involved to get a scheme to buy out. But what we can discuss today is what we think is going to help make your scheme attractive to an insurance company in the first place. So if you like, that's the the insurance company's buyout triage process, for want of a better phrase. So having spoken to Julian earlier, ignore this at your peril, I would say. Without taking the insurance company's triage process into account, it's highly unlikely, I think, that your scheme will be offered attractive buyout terms, or possibly even worse still, you may not be offered any terms at all. So it's quite a sobering thought. So I think this is probably a good time for me to invite Julian to come in and explain what he is actually seeing happening in practice in the buyout market at the moment, and then we can move on to talk a little bit more about what it is that insurance companies are looking for in schemes that want to buy out.
Great, thanks, Graham, and good afternoon, everyone. So firstly, just to introduce myself, my name is Julian Hobday, and I'm a director in Legal and General's pension risk transfer business. So my main role is to work with pension scheme trustees and their advisors as they look to complete buyouts and buy-ins to try and ensure that the process is as smooth as possible for all parties. So I think before we get into the detail of our triage process, as Graham has said, we did think it would be useful just to give some background on the current state of the buy-in market, as hopefully this will help give some context to some of the points that we're going to make as we go through the seminar. So I guess the first point I make in terms of general activity, it was a relatively quiet start to the year. So I suspect there are many reasons for that, but certainly the interest from pension schemes was less than we typically see. But what we've seen over the second half of 2021, and certainly this looks set to continue going into next year and probably beyond as well, is a significant upturn in the interest in buyouts and buy-ins that we're seeing from pension schemes. So basically, there's a huge increase in the level of demand that we're seeing as an insurance company for these endgame solutions. And again, I think one other point I would like to make at this stage, and I think is relevant given the focus of this seminar is on small, medium schemes and getting them ready for buyout, is that the big deals get the headlines, and I'm sure if you followed the pensions press, you'll have seen some of the headlines when some of the jumbo schemes have transacted in the recent past. But there is a lot of activity going on below that. So, for example, in 2020, Legal and General worked with 29 schemes where the premium was below 100 million. So I think it's fair to say that the market isn't dominated by jumbo schemes, although quite naturally they do get the headlines. So So I think given the level of demand that we are seeing, it unfortunately means that as an insurance company, we just physically can't quote on every single scheme that approaches us. So I think in terms of our triage process and deciding which cases we can quote on, I think what we're looking for ideally is to be involved with schemes that are firstly well prepared, and secondly they've got a clear plan through to completing the buy-in or the buyout. I think this gives us comfort that the tranche of a transaction actually happening is as good as it can be, which is all we can ask for as an insurance company. So some of the key things that we look for in schemes that are approaching us, I think the first thing, and for me, I think this is the key point, is affordability. So what we look for here is, firstly, do the trustees have an idea of what the buyout premium is likely to be? And I think the most common route here is to get an estimate from your scheme actuary. It won't be the actual cost, it is just an estimate, but it should give trustees a ballpark idea about where the buyout premium is likely to land. Second aspect of affordability is, how is the premium to be paid? So can it be covered by the scheme assets? And I think if that's the case, it's probably a more straightforward process. However, quite often in lots of the cases that we see, the scheme assets aren't sufficient to cover the premium. So in those cases, it means that a contribution from the scheme sponsor may be needed. And I think in those cases, ideally what we're looking for is a comfort that the key stakeholders on the sponsor side are fully on board with, firstly, making the required contribution, but also the process more generally, and that they're actually comfortable with the direction in which the trustees are headed. And I think the final point related to affordability is probably slightly nuanced in the are the assets sufficiently liquid? And I guess as a trustees, you don't want to be ready to sign your buyout contract with your chosen insurer, and then you find out that you're invested in a property fund which takes 6 months to redeem. So again, that's a final sort of affordability point that we look for. So a number of aspects to that, and I'll now hand back to Graham, and I think he's going to chat through what schemes can do practically to address these points to make sure that you are as affordability ready as possible.
Thanks, Julian. Yes, so just picking up on Julian's comments there around affordability and having all stakeholders on board. So what should trustees, sponsors and advisors actually be doing here in practice? So in my view, I'd say this demonstrates the importance of trustees, sponsors and advisors all working together in harmony. My view has always been that the best run schemes enjoy a true partnership approach. And I think this is particularly true in the run up to buyout, which does rely on collaboration between the different parties. And I'd say probably without this, a plan to buy out the scheme could easily become derailed. And Julian and I were talking about this before the webinar, and it is surprising the number of times a scheme has failed to complete a buyout because the trustees and the employer weren't on the same page. And I know this has happened more than once, but I will hasten to add these are not schemes that I've ever been working on. The trustees did get close to buyout, but didn't agree with the employer that it would pay a final contribution into the scheme at the very end to get it over the line. The consequence was that the buyout didn't happen. So there's a lot of wasted time and energy has gone into it there, and disappointment all round. And for me, that sort of pitfall is clearly avoidable. I think it's extremely important to avoid this, that you have a clear and well-documented journey plan that sets out your path to buyout. So this could encompass a number of things. So, firstly, it'd be like your time horizon to buy out, what contributions are going to be paid and when. But obviously with contributions, you've got to balance that against investment strategy decisions and de-risking. Other practical areas would be, for example, actions on data cleansing. So cleaning up the data you've already got, perhaps using tracing services for existence checks, getting hold of spouses' details. All of that can help with the buyout process. Another one is formalizing your scheme's benefits specification. Get that reviewed by the legal advisor so there's absolute clarity on the benefits in your scheme. And for those of you whose schemes are contracted out, GMP equalisation will no doubt rear its head again as part of this process. And to be honest, this list could go on, and so we've not got time to get into the details of all of that today. But what I would say is that whatever your plan is to get to buyout, it does need to be clearly set out, monitored, reviewed, and refined as you go along. Just think about this a little bit more widely. Allied to this, another important aspect, I think, in this process is to identify your key risks, decide which risks you're going to mitigate. And that's, the obvious ones here will probably be your investment and inflation risks. But there's also risks that you're going to run. And for the risks that you're going to run, you will need to consider what sort of contingency plans you might put in place if these risks are realized. So just thinking off the top of my head here, a couple of things that you might be thinking of would be to put in place some guarantees or agreeing a contribution structure that is conditional on the funding position of the scheme as you move towards buyout. So I think with careful planning here, this is going to go some way to keeping your scheme on track. And it also means that when you do approach people like Julian or other insurance companies, and they ask questions on where your scheme's at and what you've been doing to get ready for buyout, you should have that credibility that they're looking for, and that will be attractive. One final comment I've got on this area is, the pensions regulator is going to mandate the setting of long-term funding targets and journey plans as part of the upcoming Code of Practice on Scheme Funding. And, as we said, for a lot of schemes, particularly at small to medium end, this is going to mean targeting buyout. So I think given that we know this is coming down the track from the pensions regulator, I think this makes complete sense to me to start putting your plans in place now. So I'd recommend, if you haven't done so already, as trustees and sponsors, start engaging with your advisors on this point. Julian, I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd like to add on this, or whether we can now move on to the next key point.
Yeah, no, that was a great summary. I think the key point is making sure everybody at the sponsor is on board, and I think again we've seen a few cases derailed particularly where there's an overseas sponsor where perhaps the UK branch would be comfortable with what's being proposed by the trustees, but there's an overseas sponsor who wasn't fully brought up to speed with the process and has pulled the plug quite late on in the day. So yeah, I guess it's particularly as quite often a sponsor contribution will be required. So yeah, that's great. That was a really, really good summary. Thanks, Graham. So I think one of the other key points that we wanted to chat through that we consider as part of our triage process is the design and structure of the scheme's benefits. And I think this is particularly relevant for small, medium-sized schemes. So I guess first question is, why do we do this? And I think the reason is, if the scheme goes to buyout, then ultimately, as an insurer, we'll be responsible for taking over the administration and making sure that the scheme members are paid directly every month on time. So what we like and what we look for, and as I say, this is particularly relevant for small and medium-sized schemes, is schemes that are relatively straightforward for our team to take on and to pay, and to administer. So, for example, some of the complexities that may put insurers off are lots of different benefit categories and/or complicated pension increases. So I guess in terms of what trustees can do to prepare, I think the first step is to review your scheme benefits with your advisors and both your actuary and your legal advisors. So if you work with experienced advisors like Spence, for example, who've got links in to all of the insurance companies, then they can discuss with us on an informal basis any unusual features in your pension scheme. And they could do that several years before you approach the market. And hopefully that would ensure that there's nothing within your scheme design, or if there is, you can take some actions to mitigate that would ultimately put insurers off providing a buyout quote when you're in a position to get one. So again, I think there's lots of examples that we've done in practice where we sort of work with schemes several years before they actually approach the market, which means we can simplify and streamline the scheme benefit design. So ultimately, it makes it a more attractive proposition for insurers in general. So I'm now going to just hand back to Graham, who can outline again some of the practical ways that trustees can simplify and streamline their scheme benefits to, again, make them ultimately more attractive to an insurance company.
Thanks, Julian. I think some really interesting comments and thoughts there that you've mentioned. So I think there are some steps that schemes can take to help remove some of the problems associated with scheme design. The first step is hopefully an obvious one. And we did mention this a little earlier on, it's to carry out an audit of your scheme's benefits and ideally get your benefit specification signed off by your legal advisors. And the reason for this is that you then have that starting point of exactly what benefits are being provided by your scheme and therefore what you're looking to insure with an insurance company. As part of this, it's probably also helpful to make decisions around any discretionary benefits that your scheme might have. Like, for example, some schemes have discretionary pension increases on maybe pre-97 benefits, for example, and get those sort of, make those decisions around your discretionary benefits and get them hard coded into the rules where appropriate. And as Julian said, doing these actions, it all helps to sort of remove the uncertainty that insurance companies don't like, and it will help you achieve the best possible price in terms of a competitive premium. I mean, if you do find that your scheme's got some other complexities, and think of some unusual underpins here, thinking off the top of my head here what an example might be, but perhaps it might be your future pension increases in your scheme might be subject to some overall minimum level. I know that's certainly something that I've seen in the past. It's helpful to engage with the insurance company well ahead of your expected transaction date. And as Julian said, this might be several years prior to actually completing your buyout, and use that period to work with the insurance company to work out potential solutions. Experienced insurance companies like L&G, for example, they will have seen this sort of thing come up lots of times, and they will know the best ways of dealing with it. Another situation I'm thinking of here might relate to perhaps some of the second order benefits, such as child pensions. As long as the insurance company's standard benefits that they would offer when you buy out are at least as generous as those in your scheme, it might actually be possible to achieve a more competitive buyout premium by over-insuring the scheme's benefits. Now, that might sound a little bit strange, but what I mean by this is that by actually insuring on the insurance company's standard terms, that could actually result in a more competitive premium than if the scheme's actual benefits were insured. And the reason for this is that the increasing costs associated with insuring that more valuable benefit is actually offset, or more than offset, by the cheaper administration charges incorporated into the buyout premium. So there's a bit to take in there. And I think for me on this point, the key takeaway is to make sure you know what your benefits are under your scheme rules, and where you have got some complexities or some difficulties or maybe even uncertainties, you can use that time, actually engage with the insurance company early on in the buyout process on the best way with dealing with anything that's unusual. And that should help you achieve the most competitive buyout premium possible. Julian, I'm not sure if you've got anything else to add on that, or whether we could start looking at some possible questions.
Yeah, no, nothing really to add. I think, as you said, the key point is early engagement, and we're always happy to have conversations with schemes and/or their advisors, even though they may be 2-3 years from actually looking to buy out. So yeah, I think the key point is early engagement and flexibility. Yeah.
Thanks both. There are questions, and perhaps it doesn't come as a surprise to know that we're starting with a $64,000 question for many trustees at the moment, and I suppose that's whether or not they're planning to buy out in the near future, and that is what to do about GMP equalisation, addressing their GMP inequalities. Now, I was conscious of the fact that early discussions after this obligation became clear suggested that buyout providers were very keen, if not adamant, that GMP equality be addressed by conversion and by converting GMP into scheme benefits. But trustees have kind of gone off that method a little bit. And I just wonder, has that changed buyout provider views as well? Julian, maybe one for you to start with.
Yeah, no, great, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, you're absolutely right. I think initially conversion was our favoured methodology because it's more straightforward and therefore simpler for us to administer longer term. But the year-on-year approach is becoming much more popular, and I think the tax issues with the conversion approach mean that increasingly more and more of our clients are looking at the year-on-year methodology for GMP equalisation. So I think this is something that we are actively working on, an automated solution with our administration systems, so that we can offer the year-on-year methodology going forward. And certainly over the course of next year, we expect to be able to offer that as standard. And I think that's more, obviously, I think we appreciate that increasingly more and more schemes are looking at the C2 year-on-year approach as a way to equalise GMPs as being consistent with their fiduciary duties. So I think it's reliant on us to come up with a solution that supports that. So yeah, as I say, we prefer the conversion approach, but equally the year-on-year approach is something that we'd expect to be able to support over the short term, or within the short term.
I suppose just a supplementary point that your expectation there would not be a material increase in price, but based purely on the method for GMP equalisation. Is that fair to say? Yeah, no, definitely. That's a good point as well. So effectively, if we would the extra premium for GMP equalisation would just be the cost of the additional benefits. So there may be differences between the two methods, but that's in terms of the benefits payable. But there would not, certainly from our perspective, there wouldn't be an additional cost because of the extra admin with the year-on-year approach. So yeah, fully expect the pricing to be consistent between the two methods. Okay, thanks, Julian. And maybe one for you now, Graham, to, I suppose, part observation and part question. In our experience, savings sometimes arise from checking the benefit spec. It's not always one way, and overpayments are common, sometimes come to light. They can be put to right for the future and not insured. Any kind of experience of this, Graham, and just, I suppose, skeletons coming out of the cupboard when doing a benefit spec?
Yeah, interesting question. First-hand experience, have I actually seen that? No, but I'm sure that this can happen. The primary reason for doing the review of the benefits is to make sure you actually understand what you've got, and it's surprising the number of times that people think their scheme provides certain benefits and it doesn't. So that's like the fundamental reason for doing it. But yes, I don't know who's put the question, but it is a great question. And yeah, I think, you're right. It's not always one way, and I'm sure there is the chance that overpayments do come up. And yes, I think you're right. You can put that right, and it's not insured, so it shouldn't sort of derail your process of trying to get. Oh, thanks, Anna. And it shouldn't derail your process to get to buyout. Yeah, maybe just on a slightly related point, and I think you both touched on this, is benefit specs also about checking your data in order. And Julian, you've tried to dispel some myths in your comments there. That for instance, buyout providers are only interested in the biggest transaction. They're not. They're interested in people who are serious about buying out. So we know that good, clean data is important, and you'll take that into account and whether or not you want to do a deal. But where every effort is made on giving you data that is in order, can that help with the pricing as well? Yeah, I think it probably helps with the pricing. So obviously, ultimately, it's needed for buyout, but certainly, I guess there are certain items that we need for pricing, such as postcodes, marital status, spouse's status of birth, and the more of that information you have, the better your price potentially, or certainly the more certainty we can have on the pricing. So yeah, as I said, I think good, clean data not only helps with the ultimate buyout, but it potentially also helps with the pricing as well. Yeah. Lovely. Thanks, Julian. And the next one, probably for both of you, I'll start with you first, Graham, because you talked a little bit about getting ready for buyout. And a question here just around, in advance of actually going to market, maybe doing other de-risking measures
member option exercises, and so on. So first of all, from your experience, from a consultancy point of view, what member option exercises will give you bang for your buck before you go out to a buyout provider?
Sure, thanks, John. Yeah, this is another interesting area, and thank you to whoever's put the question in. As part of longer term preparations for buying out, it is common for schemes, particularly perhaps driven by the sponsor schemes more traditionally, to undertake some form of member option exercises to help reduce buyout costs. So in terms of what gives you bang for your buck, quite often I think an area that schemes tend to look at are trivial commutation exercises to remove members who've got the very small pots that really where it's just going to cost a lot to administer their benefits. So that might be a first step. Other exercises might be transfer value exercises, possibly enhanced transfer values being offered there, or pension increase exchange exercises where you might get a one-off increase in exchange for a series of future inflation-linked increases, perhaps, or fixed increases, rather, I should say. So if we take like transfer value exercises, typically here, sort of the rationale might be to offer members an attractive transfer value, which might be above the amount they would normally get if they asked for a normal transfer value, but they would be below the cost of buying out that member's benefits with an insurance company. So the idea here is if the member takes up the offer, having obviously gone through all the appropriate independent financial advice to make sure it's in their best interest to do so, then there is potentially then a saving to the scheme, which would help to reduce the buyout premium. And my experiences are that if these experiences are run well and run properly, you can generate decent buyout savings. But I think from an insurance company point of view, and Julian, I'm sure you're going to want to jump in a moment. My understanding is that I think you need to make sure that you understand if these exercises have taken place, on what sort of terms and how they've been run. And I think your preference would be that any such member option exercises are run on a basis, if you like, no selection. So I'm sure you're probably itching to jump in here.
That's right. I think we recognise that there's interest amongst pension schemes in running these exercises because I guess they offer member choice, and if they are successful, then ultimately it would reduce the buyout premium, which you'd be sort of foolish not to consider such an option. So, but as you said, Graham, I think from an insurer perspective, we would look out for mortality selection risks. So, for example, if you ran a transfer value exercise that targeted the less healthy lives only, so you basically encourage those members to leave the scheme and take a transfer value, and thus when you came to buy out, you were left with the healthy lives, then obviously that would be a concern for an insurance company. But I think as Graham says, as long as the exercise is run on an objective basis and you're not proactively selecting a specific subgroup, then we can get comfortable with most exercises. And again, I think it's a case of making sure that you work with experienced advisors like Spence who know the insurance market and can advise you on the exact sort of exercise that you're looking to run to make sure that the selection issues don't arise or that the exercise doesn't hinder buyout if that is your ultimate objective.
Thanks both. I'm conscious of the time. We are scheduled for a 2:30 finish, but there is just one more question, so I hope we can squeeze it in, and I think one for you, Julian. And the question is, does already having lots of individual annuities make buying out more problematic?
I think it depends. If you've done individual annuities as and when the scheme retires and you've shopped around and you've done it on an open market basis, then it shouldn't hinder you too much. I guess if you've done a bulk exercise in the past where you've worked with one insurer and you have effectively a bulk policy covering a bunch of individual retirements in the past, then that could be a bit more difficult because realistically, would other insurers quote where another insurer already has an established relationship? So it may not hinder you buying out with your existing insurer, but it may reduce the market or the competitive tension that you would otherwise get in a more typical exercise.
Okay. So something else to be considered, but clearly not a deal breaker, Julian.
Not a deal breaker, no. But yeah, as I say, realistically, if L&G wasn't the incumbent insurer and there was another similar scheme where there was no previous insurance, then I guess we would probably favour the scheme where there was no previous insurance. But again, it's not a deal breaker.
Okay. Thank you. Just doing one final check of the Q&A box. I'm not seeing anything new coming in, and we are just ever so slightly over time. So we will draw things to a close now. As I mentioned before, this webinar will be posted to social media sites like LinkedIn later on today. If anything comes to you after the event, please don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us today. Happy to have follow-ups on all of this. That just leaves me to thank Graham and Julian for their contributions today, and to thank all our participants for taking part in the conversation. Thanks everyone, and have a good day.